The notification appeared at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, just as Naomi Reed was settling into bed with a stack of ungraded essays. She almost ignored the soft chime from Ethan's iPad, which sat charging on his nightstand, another of his many devices that seemed to buzz constantly with the urgent business of his tech startup. But something about the timing felt off. Ethan was in Seattle, supposedly closing a crucial funding round, and he'd been unusually quiet all day. The screen displayed a banking alert she'd never seen before: multi-factor authentication required. For international wire transfer, $847,000 USD. Verify transaction within 12 hours or transfer will be declined. Naomi's breath caught. $847,000. Their entire joint savings account held maybe $12,000 on a good month. She set down her red pen, her mind racing through possibilities. A mistake? A hack? Some kind of corporate transaction she wasn't aware of. Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The account number meant nothing to her, but the bank name did. It was the same institution where they'd opened their joint checking account 15 years ago, right after their wedding. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the iPad, her thumb hovering over the notification. She shouldn't look. This was Ethan's business, his device, his privacy. But that amount of money, that was their life savings, their down payment on a bigger house, their security. She tapped the notification. The banking app opened to a login screen, and without thinking, she entered the credentials she'd memorized from years of helping Ethan with tax documents. His birthday, followed by the year they'd met, then an exclamation point. He'd always been predictable about passwords, despite her gentle nagging about security. The login succeeded. What she found made her stomach drop. The account wasn't just real, it was robust. The current balance read $1,847,293.67. Nearly $2 million. Sitting in an account she'd never known existed, under her husband's name alone. Naomi's vision blurred as she scrolled through the transaction history. Regular deposits dating back 3 years, some as large as $50,000. She recognized some of the source accounts, their joint checking, the business account for Ethan's company, and others she didn't recognize at all. But it was the most recent deposit that made her hands shake: $200,000 from the Thomas Morgan Family Trust, her family's trust. The inheritance from her grandparents that was supposed to be in a secure investment account, growing slowly for their future children's education. The money her parents had entrusted to Ethan's financial management because he was so good with investments and they were traditional about letting the husband handle these things. She took screenshots with her phone, her teacher's instincts, kicking and document everything, create evidence, build a case. But a case for what? What was she even looking at? The bedroom door creaked, and Naomi's heart hammered as she quickly closed the banking app and set the iPad back on its charger. But it was just Oliver, their ancient golden retriever, padding over to check on her. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for his warm presence as her world tilted on its axis. "What do you think, buddy?" she whispered. "What do I do with this?" Oliver's tail wagged once, then he settled on the hardwood floor with a contented sigh. If only her problems were so simple. Naomi spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the foghorns from the bay. Every creak of the house made her jump, though she knew Ethan wouldn't be home until Thursday. Her mind churned through explanations, each one more far-fetched than the last. Maybe it was a business account she'd misunderstood. Maybe he was saving for a surprise, a house upgrade, a vacation, an anniversary gift. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why her husband had hidden nearly $2 million from her. But deep down, in the part of her that had been teaching teenagers for 12 years and could spot a lie from across a classroom, she knew better. Morning came gray and drizzly, typical for San Francisco in November. Naomi went through her routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, review lesson plans, but her mind kept drifting to those numbers on the screen. $1,847,293.67. The precision of it felt intentional, calculated. She was halfway through her second cup of coffee when her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Meeting's running long. Won't be home until Friday. Miss you. Miss you." The words felt hollow now, like lines from a play she'd been unknowingly acting in for years. Instead of responding immediately, Naomi opened her laptop and began what she told herself was just research. She Googled secret bank accounts marriage and found herself tumbling down a rabbit hole of financial infidelity, hidden assets, and divorce strategies. The terms were foreign to her: asset concealment, dissipation of marital property, forensic accounting, but the stories were heartbreakingly familiar. Wives who discovered their husbands had been preparing to leave for years, systematically moving money out of reach. Husbands who used their wives' trust funds to finance new lives with other women. The parallels made her sick. By the time she had to leave for school, Naomi had filled 3 pages of a yellow legal pad with questions and observations. Ethan's frequent business trips, his insistence on handling all their finances, the way he'd grown distant over the past year, claiming stress from the company, the expensive dinners he claimed were client meetings, the designer clothes that appeared in his closet, which he said were necessary for investor presentations. At Roosevelt High School, Naomi found herself unable to focus on her advanced placement literature class. As her students discussed the themes of betrayal in Othello, she couldn't help but see parallels to her own situation. Iago's manipulation, Othello's blind trust, Desdemona's innocence. Which character was she? Mrs. Reed? Ashley Martinez, one of her brightest students, was looking at her with concern. "Are you okay? You seem really distracted today." Naomi forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetie. Continue with your analysis of Act III." But as the discussion continued, she found herself thinking about Desdemona's final moments, still professing love for the husband who was killing her. Had she been that naive, that willfully blind? During her lunch break, she called her best friend Janelle Carter, who taught guidance counseling at the same school. "I need to talk to you," Naomi said without preamble when Janelle picked up. "What's wrong? You sound weird. Can you meet me in my classroom? And bring coffee, strong coffee." Janelle arrived 10 minutes later with 2 cups of the cafeteria's notoriously awful coffee and a concerned expression. "Okay, spill. What's going on?" Naomi had rehearsed this conversation in her head, but now that the moment was here, she didn't know where to start. "Hypothetically," she began, "if you discovered that your husband had been hiding money from you, a lot of money, what would you do?" "Hypothetically," Janelle raised an eyebrow. "I'd hire a divorce attorney and take half of everything he owned." "But we're not talking hypothetically, are we?" Naomi's facade crumbled. She told Janelle everything: the notification, the secret account, the family trust money, her sleepless night of research. Janelle listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Jesus, Naomi," Janelle said when she finished. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the transaction history, at least 3 years, maybe longer." "And you never suspected anything?" The question stung because it was one Naomi had been asking herself all morning. "I trusted him. He's my husband. We've been together for 15 years. Honey," Janelle's voice was gentle but firm, "trust is beautiful, but willful blindness isn't. You're one of the smartest people I know. You analyze literature for a living. You pick up on subtext and hidden meanings in centuries-old plays, but you couldn't see what was happening in your own marriage. That's not fair." "You're right. It's not fair. It's not fair that he lied to you, or that he stole from your family, or that he's been planning God knows what behind your back. But Naomi, you have to stop making excuses for him. This isn't some misunderstanding or business deal gone wrong. This is financial abuse." The term hit Naomi like a physical blow. Financial abuse. She'd read about it in her internet research that morning, but hearing it applied to her own situation made it real in a way that statistics and articles couldn't. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice small. "First, you document everything. Every transaction, every lie, every suspicious behavior you can remember. Then you find a lawyer, a good one who specializes in this kind of thing. And Naomi," Janelle reached across the desk and squeezed her hand, "you stop protecting him. He sure as hell isn't protecting you." The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Naomi taught her classes on autopilot, her mind churning through 15 years of marriage, looking for signs she'd missed. How many times had Ethan deflected her questions about money? How many investment opportunities had he claimed were too complicated for her to understand? How many times had he patted her hand and told her not to worry about the finances, that he had everything under control? She'd been so busy being the supportive wife, working full-time, managing their household, entertaining his clients that she'd never questioned why their standard of living never seemed to improve despite his company's supposed success. She'd assumed they were just getting by, that the startup world was feast or famine, that financial security would come eventually. Now she realized that financial security had already come for Ethan, just not for her. That evening, alone in their beautifully appointed house in the Richmond district, Naomi sat at their kitchen table with her laptop and began building a case. She created a secure email account, uploaded her screenshots to a cloud storage service, and started a detailed timeline of suspicious events. The expensive watch Ethan had claimed was a gift from an investor, the weekend trips to wine country that he said were team-building exercises, the new clothes, the upgraded phone, the subtle but noticeable improvements to his appearance over the past year. As she worked, Oliver lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on her with worried brown eyes. Even the dog seemed to sense that something was wrong. Around 10 o'clock, her phone buzzed with another text from Ethan. "Hope you had a good day. Investor dinner running late. Talk tomorrow?" For the first time in their marriage, Naomi didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at the message, analyzing it like one of her students' essays. The casual tone, the vague details, the way he'd phrased it as a question when he'd never asked permission before. Was he really at an investor dinner? Or was he somewhere else, with someone else, spending money he'd stolen from their marriage? She finally typed back, "Sure. Sleep well." It was a lie, but then again, their entire relationship seemed to be built on lies now. At least hers was small and harmless. His had stolen her future and her family's trust along with it. Before bed, Naomi made one more stop at Ethan's iPad. The banking app was still logged in, and she saw that the international transfer had been approved. $847,000 sent to an account in the Cayman Islands. She took more screenshots, her hands steadier now than they'd been the night before. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was the same one who'd woken up yesterday morning. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same laugh lines from years of teaching teenagers. But something fundamental had changed. The trust was gone, replaced by something harder and more determined. Tomorrow, she would start fighting back. The law office of Alexander Rivera, Private Investigations, occupied a narrow space between a Vietnamese restaurant and a vintage clothing store in the Mission District. Naomi had found Alex through an online search for San Francisco financial investigation, and his reviews were either glowing or scathing, with no middle ground. The satisfied clients praised his thoroughness and discretion. The dissatisfied ones complained about his abrasive personality and lack of sensitivity. Perfect, Naomi thought. She didn't need sensitivity. She needed results. The office was exactly what she'd expected: cramped, cluttered, and smelling faintly of coffee and cigarettes. Alex himself was not. Instead of the rumpled, chain-smoking detective she'd pictured, he was lean and athletic, probably in his early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and sharp brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance. "Mrs. Reed," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "You sounded upset on the phone. Cheating husband?" "I'm not sure yet," Naomi said, settling into the chair and pulling out her folder of printed screenshots and notes. "But definitely a lying one." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Those aren't always the same thing. Show me what you've got." Naomi spread her documentation across his desk, walking him through the discovery of the secret account, the family trust money, and the international transfer. Alex listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "The account has been active for 3 years," she concluded. "Nearly $2 million have passed through it, including money from my family's trust, and what I now realize were regular transfers from our joint account. And your husband doesn't know you know about this?" "He's still in Seattle. I've been acting normal, but I don't know how long I can keep it up." Alex leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Why didn't you just ask him about it?" The question caught Naomi off guard. Because I wanted to understand what I was dealing with first. If I confront him and he denies it, I'll never get the truth." Smart. Most people would have gone in guns blazing and blown any chance of getting real answers. He tapped his pen against his notebook. "But I have to ask, what if there's a legitimate explanation? What if this is some kind of business account or investment fund that he just hasn't told you about? With my family's money? Without my knowledge? For 3 years?" Naomi shook her head. No, this is intentional deception. The question is why? Alex nodded slowly. Okay, I'll take the case. My rate is $400 a day plus expenses. I'll need a retainer of $2,000 to start. That's fine. Naomi had already moved $5,000 from her personal savings account to cover investigative costs. What's your first step? I'm going to trace the money, every deposit, every transfer, every withdrawal. If your husband is hiding assets, there's a pattern, and patterns leave footprints. He pulled out a contract and slid it across the desk. I'll also run a comprehensive background check, credit reports, property records, business filings. People who hide money usually hide other things too. Naomi signed the contract with hands that barely trembled. How long will this take? Depends on how deep the rabbit hole goes. Could be a week, could be a month. In the meantime, you need to keep acting normal. Don't change your routine, don't ask suspicious questions, and whatever you do, don't let him know you've hired me. What if he's planning to leave? Alex's expression darkened. Then we better work fast. Over the next 3 days, while Ethan remained in Seattle, Naomi fell into a strange double life. During the day, she taught her classes, graded papers, and attended faculty meetings as if nothing had changed. But in the evenings, she became a different person, a detective in her own life, systematically reviewing years of financial documents, credit card statements, and tax returns. The patterns Alex had mentioned began to emerge. Small transfers from their joint account that she'd never noticed, usually labeled as business expenses or tax payments, larger deposits that corresponded to family visits or holiday gifts from her parents. Even their mortgage payments seemed suspicious now. Why were they still paying the same amount after 15 years when they should have been able to refinance for a better rate? She called her parents on Thursday evening. Hi, Mom. I was just reviewing some of our financial documents and wanted to confirm something about the trust fund. Oh, honey, you know I don't understand those things. Your father handles all that. And he trusts Ethan completely. Such a smart boy, always so good with numbers. I know, but could you ask Dad to send me the latest statements? I'd like to understand how the investments are performing. There was a pause. Is everything okay? You sound stressed. Naomi closed her eyes, hating herself for the lie she was about to tell. Everything's fine. Ethan's just been so busy with the company that I'm trying to take on more of the financial planning. You know how it is. That's wonderful, dear. I'll have your father send those statements right over. He'll be so pleased that you're taking an interest. The statements arrived by email an hour later, and Naomi's worst fears were confirmed. According to her father's records, the trust fund contained $1.2 million. According to the bank's records, it contained $847,000. The difference, $353,000, matched several large deposits in Ethan's secret account. She was still processing this betrayal when her phone rang. Alex, we need to meet, he said without preamble. I found something. They met at a 24-hour diner in the Castro, a place Alex said he used for sensitive conversations. The late-night crowd was sparse, a few night shift workers, some insomniacs, and a couple of what looked like other private investigators having their own clandestine meetings. Your husband's been busy, Alex said, sliding a manila folder across the table. I've tracked down 3 additional accounts, all opened in the past 2 years. The total across all accounts is close to $2.8 million. Jesus. Naomi's coffee grew cold as she reviewed the documents. Where did all this money come from? Multiple sources. Your family trust, obviously. Regular transfers from your joint account that he's been making for years, small amounts that wouldn't trigger any alerts. But the bulk of it came from his business. The startup? I thought it was still in the development phase. That's what he told you. But according to the corporate filings, Ethan's company was acquired by a larger tech firm 18 months ago. The sale price was $12 million. Your husband walked away with $4.2 million after taxes and investor payouts. Naomi felt the world tilt. He sold the company? He never told me. It gets worse. According to the purchase agreement, the acquiring company kept him on as a consultant for 2 years at $300,000 annually. So all those business trips, all those late nights at the office, all those stories about struggling to secure funding, lies. The word came out as a whisper. All of it lies. Alex nodded grimly. I also found something else. Property records show that your husband purchased a condominium in Pacific Heights 6 months ago. Paid cash. $1.3 million. The deed is in his name only. A condo? But we live in the Richmond. Why would he buy? Naomi stopped, her mind racing. He's planning to leave. That's what it looks like. But there's more. I ran surveillance on the property yesterday. Your husband isn't the only one with access to the apartment. Alex pulled out his phone and showed her a series of photos. Ethan entering the building with a key card. Ethan leaving the building with a young Asian woman. The woman entering the building alone, clearly comfortable with the routine. Her name is Maya Zhang, Alex continued. 28 years old, MBA from Stanford. She's officially listed as an executive assistant at his former company, but my source there says she's been working directly with your husband since the acquisition. The photos blurred as Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Not just financial betrayal then, emotional betrayal too. A complete replacement of their life together, funded by money stolen from their marriage and her family. I'm sorry, Alex said softly. I know this is hard to hear. No, Naomi wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. I needed to know. All of it. What else? Based on the financial patterns, I think he's planning to move soon. Maybe overseas. Some of these transfers are going to accounts in countries without extradition treaties. If he's going to run, he's going to run far. How long do we have? Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. But Naomi, you need to get legal representation immediately. If he disappears with this money, recovering it will be nearly impossible. That night, Naomi sat in her home office surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a stage set for a play she'd been unknowingly performing in for years. Every photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture they'd chosen together, every small domestic detail that had once felt like proof of their partnership now felt like props in an elaborate deception. She thought about calling Janelle, but it was past midnight, and besides, what would she say? That it was even worse than they'd imagined. That her husband hadn't just been hiding money, but hiding an entire second life. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching divorce attorneys. Not just any attorneys, ones who specialized in complex financial cases, hidden assets, and high net worth divorces. She read reviews, compared credentials, and made a list of the most highly recommended lawyers in the Bay Area. At the top of the list was Valerie Thomas, a former prosecutor who'd transitioned to family law after what her biography called a personal awakening about the intersection of financial abuse and domestic violence. Her reviews were stellar, her FEs were substantial, and her approach was described as relentlessly thorough and uncompromising. Naomi sent an email requesting a consultation, then sat back in her chair and looked around the office. Ethan's diplomas hung on the wall next to hers, his business awards sharing space with her teaching certificates. It had all looked so harmonious, so much like a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. Now she saw it for what it really was, a carefully constructed facade designed to keep her compliant while he systematically dismantled their life together and rebuilt it with someone else. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Coming home tomorrow afternoon. Can't wait to see you. For the first time since this nightmare began, Naomi smiled, because she couldn't wait to see him either. Not the loving, trusting wife he expected, but the woman she was becoming, someone who knew exactly what he'd done and was preparing to do something about it. She typed back, looking forward to it. We have a lot to catch up on. It wasn't a lie. They did have a lot to catch up on, starting with the $2.8 million he'd stolen and the life he'd built with another woman using money that belonged to both of them. Ethan had no idea what was waiting for him at home, but he was about to find out. Valerie Thomas's office occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian in Pacific Heights, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the Golden Gate Bridge. The space was elegant but not ostentatious, clearly designed to put high-net-worth clients at ease while demonstrating the attorney's success and competence. Valerie herself was nothing like Naomi had expected. Instead of the severe, power-suited woman she'd imagined, she was probably in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people's rent. Her manner was warm, but direct, the kind of person who could deliver devastating news with compassion but without sugarcoating. Mrs. Reed, she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. I've reviewed the materials you sent, and I have to say, your documentation is excellent. Most people don't think to preserve evidence the way you have. I'm a teacher, Naomi said. I'm used to building cases for why students deserve the grades they earn. Well, This case is going to require that same attention to detail, but with much higher stakes. Valerie opened a thick folder on her desk. Let's start with the good news. Under California community property law, you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, regardless of whose name is on the accounts. And the bad news? The bad news is that your husband has been very sophisticated about hiding assets. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the property purchases. This isn't amateur hour. Someone advised him on how to do this. Naomi's stomach clenched. How do we prove that the money belongs to both of us? That's where it gets interesting. Your husband made several mistakes. First, he used marital funds to purchase non-marital assets. Every transfer from your joint account to his secret accounts is a violation of fiduciary duty. Second, he commingled separate property with marital property when he used your family's trust fund. And third, he failed to disclose income and assets, which is fraud. So we can get the money back? We can get your share back, plus damages for the breach of fiduciary duty. But Naomi, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money. Your husband has been planning to leave this marriage for years. The question is whether he's planning to leave the country too. They spent the next hour going through the financial documents Alex had uncovered. Valerie's questions were sharp and specific, probing for details that would help build the strongest possible case. She was particularly interested in the timeline of the secret accounts and the property purchase. The Pacific Heights condo is interesting, she said. Purchasing it 6 months ago suggests he's not planning to leave immediately, but the offshore accounts worry me. If he decides to run, he could disappear with most of the money before we can get court orders to freeze the accounts. What do you recommend? First, we need to gather more evidence. I want to know everything about this Maya Jiang, how long they've been involved, whether she knows about the financial deception, whether she's complicit or just another victim. Second, we need to understand the full scope of his assets. If he's been this careful about hiding money, there might be more we haven't found. Alex Rivera suggested that. Alex is excellent at what he does, but for this next phase, we need to move carefully. If your husband suspects that you know about his deception, he might accelerate his timeline. You want me to keep pretending? For now, yes, but not for long. We'll need to file for divorce within the next few weeks to preserve your rights and prevent him from moving more assets out of reach. Naomi felt a chill at the word divorce. Even after everything she'd learned, part of her had been hoping for some other solution: counseling, reconciliation, some way to repair what had been broken. But Valerie's clinical assessment made it clear that this wasn't about marriage problems that could be fixed. This was about criminal deception that had been years in the making. What about the trust fund money? My parents trusted him with their life savings. That's actually one of our strongest claims. He had a fiduciary duty to manage that money in your family's best interests. Using it to fund his secret life is a clear breach of that duty. We can recover that money with interest and damages. Will we be able to prove all this in court? With the evidence you've gathered? Absolutely. But I'm hoping we don't have to go to court. Most cases like this settle when the guilty party realizes how much evidence we have. The key is to make sure he doesn't run before we can freeze his assets. After the meeting, Naomi drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, but everything looked different now. The house where she'd lived for 10 years, the coffee shop where she and Ethan used to have Sunday brunch, the park where they'd walked Oliver every evening, all of it felt like artifacts from someone else's life. She was pulling into her driveway when her phone rang. Alex, I found the other apartment, he said. The one in Pacific Heights. Can you meet me there? Now? What if someone sees us? Your husband is still in Seattle according to his social media. And Maya Jiang is at work. I've been watching her routine. This is our chance to see what we're dealing with. Naomi's heart pounded as she followed Alex's directions to a sleek high-rise building in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. The building was modern and elegant, with a doorman and security cameras, the kind of place that screamed wealth and exclusivity. How do we get in? She asked, meeting Alex on the sidewalk. We don't, but we don't need to. I've got a contact in the building, a maintenance worker who owes me a favor. He's going to let us into the unit while the residents are away. That's breaking and entering. No, it's not. I'm a licensed private investigator conducting a legitimate investigation. And you're the wrong spouse with a legal right to know about marital assets. We're not taking anything or damaging anything. We're just documenting what's there. The maintenance worker, a middle-aged man named Carlos, met them at a service entrance. He looked nervous but determined, and Naomi got the impression that Alex had helped him with a problem in the past. Unit to 417, Carlos said, leading them to a service elevator. The residents are both at work, but we need to be quick. 20 minutes max. The elevator ride to the 24th floor felt like an eternity. Naomi's hands were shaking, and she kept expecting alarms to go off or security guards to appear. But the hallway was empty and quiet, lined with expensive artwork and thick carpeting that muffled their footsteps. Carlos unlocked the door to 2417 and stepped aside. I'll keep watch from the lobby. Call me when you're done. Alex entered first, Naomi close behind. The apartment was stunning floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the bay, hardwood floors, expensive furniture, and artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was the personal touches that made Naomi's heart break. Photos of Ethan and Maya together, clearly taken over many months. A kitchen stocked with expensive wine and gourmet ingredients. A bathroom with his and hers toiletries. The intimacy of shared space and shared routines. A walk-in closet where Maya's designer clothes hung next to Ethan's expensive suits Naomi had never seen before. Jesus, Alex muttered, taking photos with a high-end camera. This isn't just an affair apartment. They're living together. Naomi wandered through the space in a daze, cataloging the evidence of her husband's double life. The refrigerator was covered with photos and notes, grocery lists written in Maya's handwriting, dinner reservations at restaurants Naomi couldn't afford, concert tickets for shows Ethan had claimed to attend with business colleagues. In the bedroom, she found a calendar on Maya's nightstand. Most of the entries were innocuous work meetings, yoga classes, dinner plans. But there were others that made Naomi's blood run cold. E-returns from Seattle was marked for today. Apartment viewing Singapore was circled in red for next month. And at the bottom of December, in Maya's careful handwriting, soft move date discuss with Alex, Naomi called, her voice barely steady. You need to see this. He joined her at the nightstand, studying the calendar entries. Singapore, he said grimly. That's not a vacation destination. That's a relocation plan. How long do we have? Based on this, maybe 6 weeks. 8 at the most. Naomi felt the room spinning around her. 6 weeks. Ethan was planning to disappear in 6 weeks, taking Maya and apparently most of their money with him. All those years of marriage, all those plans for their future, reduced to a soft move date penciled onto another woman's calendar. There's more, Alex said, gesturing toward a home office area in the corner of the living room. Look at this. On the desk were travel documents, passport applications for both Ethan and Maya, visa information for Singapore, and what looked like employment contracts with a tech company in Southeast Asia. But it was the financial documents that made Naomi's knees weak. Bank statements for accounts she'd never heard of, investment portfolios worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a folder labeled US Asset Transfer Timeline. He's been planning this for at least a year, Alex said, photographing everything. Maybe longer. This level of financial preparation doesn't happen overnight. Naomi sank into the desk chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. It wasn't just that Ethan had been unfaithful or even that he'd stolen money. He'd been systematically dismantling their life together while building a new one with someone else, using resources that belonged to both of them. Every day she'd spent worrying about their financial future. He'd been securing his own without her. We need to go, Alex said, checking his watch. Carlos is getting nervous, and we've got what we came for. But as they prepared to leave, Naomi noticed something else, a small jewelry box on Maya's dresser. Inside was a ring that made her heart stop. Not an engagement ring, but something even more significant, a wedding band. Simple, elegant, and engraved with a date that was 3 weeks in the future. They're getting married, she whispered. Before they leave for Singapore, they're getting married. Alex looked at the ring, his expression grim. That would make sense. Spousal privilege would protect them from having to testify against each other if this becomes a criminal case. Criminal case? Naomi, what your husband has done isn't just morally wrong. It's potentially criminal. Theft, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. If the prosecutor's office decides to pursue charges, this could become a very serious legal matter. They left the apartment in silence, Carlos locking the door behind them. In the elevator, Naomi stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at her was still recognizable, But something fundamental had changed. The trust was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that surprised her with its intensity. "What's our next move?" she asked Alex as they exited the building. "We take everything we've found to Valerie. She'll know how to use it strategically. But Naomi, you need to prepare yourself for what's coming. This isn't going to be a quiet divorce. This is going to be a war." "Good," Naomi said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I'm ready for a war." That evening, she sat in her kitchen, their kitchen, preparing dinner for a husband who would be home soon from his supposed business trip. Oliver lay at her feet, sensing her tension and whining softly. She scratched behind his ears absently while reviewing the photos Alex had taken that afternoon. The evidence was overwhelming. The secret apartment, the travel documents, the wedding ring, the timeline for their escape to Singapore. Ethan wasn't just planning to leave her, he was planning to erase her from his life entirely, as if their 15 years together had been nothing more than an inconvenient delay in his real plans. Her phone buzzed with a text, landing at SFO now. "Be home in an hour. Can't wait to see you." Naomi stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Dinner's almost ready. Safe travels." She set the phone aside and returned to her cooking, but her mind was elsewhere. In an hour, Ethan would walk through that door with his practiced smile and his carefully rehearsed stories about investor meetings and funding rounds. He would kiss her cheek, ask about her day, and probably compliment her cooking, all while knowing that he'd spent the weekend in the apartment he shared with his future wife, planning their escape to a new life funded by money stolen from this one. But this time, Naomi wouldn't be the naive, trusting wife he expected. This time, she would be playing a role too, the woman who knew exactly what he'd done and was preparing to destroy him for it. She thought about Desdemona again, the character from Othello, who'd died still professing love for the husband who'd killed her. But Naomi wasn't Desdemona. She was Portia from The Merchant of Venice, disguised, strategic, and determined to see justice done. The front door opened right on schedule. "Honey, I'm home," Ethan called, his voice warm and familiar. Naomi took a deep breath, arranged her features into a welcoming smile, and went to greet the stranger she'd been married to for 15 years. "Welcome back," she said, accepting his kiss and his embrace, while mentally cataloging every lie he was about to tell her. "How was Seattle?" "Productive," he said, setting down his suitcase and loosening his tie. "We're closer to finalizing the next round of funding. Should know more in a few weeks." "That's wonderful," Naomi said, marveling at how easily the lies came to him. "I'm so proud of how hard you've been working." Over dinner, Ethan regaled her with stories about investor meetings that had never happened and business challenges that didn't exist. He was charming and attentive, asking about her classes and laughing at her stories about difficult students. To any outside observer, they would have looked like a happy couple reconnecting after a brief separation, but Naomi found herself studying him with new eyes, looking for tells and inconsistencies in his performance. The way he avoided direct eye contact when discussing his funding challenges, the way he deflected specific questions about timelines and investor names, the expensive watch she'd never seen before, which he claimed was a loan from a business partner. "You seem different," he said suddenly, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Everything okay?" For a moment, Naomi's carefully constructed facade wavered. Had she given herself away somehow? Was she being too obvious in her scrutiny? "Just tired," she said, forcing another smile. "The end of the semester is always stressful. Plus, I've been worrying about money lately. I know you said not to, but with your funding situation uncertain." "Don't worry about money," Ethan said, his tone carrying that familiar note of condescension. "I've got everything under control. In fact, things might be looking up sooner than I expected." "Really? What do you mean?" But Ethan just smiled mysteriously and changed the subject, asking about her plans for winter break, as if he didn't already know that in 6 weeks, he planned to be in Singapore with Maya, leaving Naomi to discover his disappearance through an empty house and depleted bank accounts. After dinner, they settled into their usual evening routine, Ethan retreating to his office to catch up on emails while Naomi graded papers in the living room. But tonight, instead of focusing on her students' essays, she found herself listening to the sounds from his office. The soft clicking of keyboard keys, the occasional phone call conducted in hushed tones, the familiar rhythm of a man managing his secret life. Around 10 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from Valerie. "Can you meet tomorrow morning?" We need to move quickly. Naomi deleted the message and went upstairs to bed, leaving Ethan to his work. As she brushed her teeth, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was composed, determined, and quietly furious. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of taking her life back, but tonight, she would sleep in the same bed as the man who'd stolen her future, dreaming of justice and wondering how long she could maintain this performance before her rage consumed her completely. In the office below, Ethan continued his work, oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed plan was about to collapse around him. He had no idea that his wife had become his adversary, or that she was building a case that would not only recover what he'd stolen, but destroy the new life he'd tried to build on the ruins of their marriage. The war Alex had warned her about was beginning, and Naomi Reed was ready to fight. Valerie's office felt different at 9 in the morning, sharper, more businesslike, with the kind of focused energy that comes when legal strategies shift from theoretical to actionable. Naomi arrived precisely on time, carrying a thick folder of new evidence and a determination that surprised her with its intensity. "The apartment changes everything," Valerie said without preamble, spreading Alex's photographs across her conference table. "This isn't just financial infidelity anymore. This is systematic fraud with a clear exit strategy." Naomi studied the images of Maya's calendar, the travel documents, the wedding ring. In the harsh morning light, the evidence looked even more damning than it had in the apartment's romantic lighting. "What's our legal position?" "Stronger than I initially thought. The community property laws are clear. You're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, regardless of how cleverly he's hidden it. But more importantly, his use of your family's trust fund gives us grounds for criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" "Theft, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty." The district attorney's office has been looking for high-profile cases involving financial abuse. Your husband's sophistication in hiding assets makes this exactly the kind of case they want to prosecute. Valerie pulled out a thick legal document and slid it across the table. "This is a restraining order against asset dissipation. If we file it, your husband won't be able to move any money without court approval. But filing it means going public with our knowledge of his deception." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the document. The legal language was dense, but the implications were clear. Filing this order would end any pretense of normalcy in her marriage. There would be no going back, no possibility of reconciliation or explanation. "How long do we have to decide?" "Based on the timeline in Maya's calendar, 2 weeks at most. If he's planning to leave in December, he'll start moving assets soon. We need to act before he can drain the accounts. And if we wait too long, then you could lose everything. Once money leaves the country, recovery becomes exponentially more difficult." Naomi thought about the previous evening, sitting across the dinner table from Ethan as he spun elaborate lies about investor meetings and funding challenges. The performance had been flawless, his concern for their financial future seemingly genuine. But now she understood it for what it was: a calculated deception designed to keep her compliant while he orchestrated their destruction. "File it," she said. "File everything." Valerie nodded approvingly. "I'll also recommend that we contact Detective Clara Diaz in the white-collar crimes unit. She's been building cases against financial predators, and your husband's methods suggest he didn't develop this strategy alone. You think there are other victims?" "I think your husband is too sophisticated for this to be his first time." "The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the timing of the asset transfers, someone taught him how to do this." The meeting lasted 2 hours, with Valerie explaining the legal process in detail. Naomi would need to provide additional documentation, submit to forensic accounting, and prepare for the possibility of testifying in both civil and criminal proceedings. It was overwhelming, but also oddly liberating. For the first time since discovering Ethan's betrayal, she felt like she was taking action rather than simply reacting. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "One more thing," Valerie said as they concluded. "You'll need emotional support through this process. Do you have someone you can talk to? A therapist? A support group?" "My friend Janelle has been helping." "That's good, but you might want to consider professional counseling. What you're going through is a form of trauma, and trauma affects decision-making. We need you sharp and focused for what's coming." After leaving Valerie's office, Naomi drove to the library and spent the afternoon researching financial abuse. The statistics were staggering. 99 of domestic violence cases involve some form of financial control. Victims often didn't recognize the abuse because it was so normalized, so integrated into the power dynamics of their relationships. As she read case studies and survivor testimonies, Naomi saw her own marriage reflected in the patterns. Ethan's insistence on controlling their finances, his dismissive attitude when she expressed concerns about money, the way he'd gradually isolated her from financial decision-making while presenting himself as the responsible partner managing their future. She'd thought she was being supportive. Now she realized she'd been complicit in her own victimization. Her phone buzzed with a notification from an online support forum for financial abuse survivors. She'd joined anonymously the previous week, using a pseudonym to share her story and seek advice. Now there was a direct message from someone called Phoenix27. I read your post about discovering the secret accounts. I went through something similar 2 years ago. If you want to talk to someone who understands, I'm here. Naomi clicked on Phoenix27's profile and found a carefully worded account of financial betrayal that mirrored her own experience in shocking detail. A tech executive husband, hidden assets, a planned relocation with a younger woman. The only difference was that Phoenix27's story had a resolution, criminal charges, asset recovery, and a new life built on the ruins of the old one. She typed back, I would love to talk. This is all so overwhelming. The response came within minutes. Can you meet for coffee? I'm in the Bay Area too. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who's been through it. They arranged to meet the next day at a cafe in Berkeley, far enough from Naomi's usual haunts to avoid running into anyone she knew. Phoenix27, who introduced herself as Damon Brooks, turned out to be a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of tired eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom. I almost didn't come, Damon said, stirring her coffee nervously. Talking about this stuff still brings up a lot of emotions. How long has it been since the divorce was finalized? 18 months. Since I discovered what he'd been doing. 3 years. The legal process takes forever, but it's worth it. Damon's story unfolded like a cautionary tale. Her ex-husband had been a prominent venture capitalist who'd used their marriage as cover for increasingly sophisticated financial schemes. By the time she discovered the deception, he'd moved $8 million offshore and was planning to relocate to Switzerland with his business partner's daughter. The worst part wasn't the money, Damon said. It was realizing that our entire marriage had been a lie. Every conversation about our future, every plan we made together, every moment I thought we were building something he was already planning. His exit. How did you recover? Legally or emotionally? Damon laughed bitterly. Legally, I got lucky. He made mistakes, just like your husband is making mistakes. The forensic accountants found the paper trail, and the prosecutor's office was eager to make an example of him. I recovered most of the money and he got 3 years in federal prison. And emotionally, that's still a work in progress. But I'll tell you what helped: connecting with other survivors. There's a whole network of women who've been through this, and we help each other navigate the legal system and rebuild our lives. Damon pulled out her phone and showed Naomi a private social media group called Financial Phoenix. The description? Read. Support and resources for survivors of financial abuse and fraud. We meet monthly in person, but there's ongoing support online. Lawyers, investigators, therapists, other survivors, everyone who understands what you're going through. Naomi felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For weeks, she'd felt isolated and alone, as if she were the only person naive enough to be deceived so completely. But here was evidence of a community, a network of women who'd not only survived similar betrayals but had found ways to help others do the same. There's something else, Damon said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Some of these cases are connected. The same law firms, the same financial advisors, the same methods for hiding assets. There's a whole industry built around helping wealthy men escape their marriages with maximum financial benefit. You mean it's organized? I mean, there are people who specialize in this kind of legal financial abuse. They market their services as asset protection and divorce planning, but really they're helping clients commit fraud. Naomi thought about Alex's observation that Ethan's methods were too sophisticated for a first-timer. Do you think my husband used one of these services? From what you've described, almost certainly. The shell companies, the timing, the offshore accounts, that's not something you figure out on your own. That evening, Naomi sat in her kitchen reviewing the materials Damon had given her: contact information for specialized attorneys, forensic accountants who worked with abuse survivors, and a list of warning signs that made her stomach clench with recognition. She'd been living with financial abuse for years without recognizing it, normalizing behavior that was actually a systematic erosion of her autonomy and security. Ethan came home at his usual time, greeting her with the same practiced warmth he'd shown for weeks. But now Naomi could see the performance for what it was. The way he asked about her day without really listening to her answers. The casual dismissal when she mentioned being tired or stressed. The subtle condescension when she brought up anything related to money or planning. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Fine. The usual." She watched him carefully, looking for signs of stress or suspicion. "How's the funding situation progressing?" "Getting closer. Should have definitive news soon." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, there might be some travel required in the next few weeks. International meetings with potential investors." "International? Where?" "Singapore. Maybe Hong Kong. Nothing definite yet, but I wanted to give you advance warning." The lie came so easily that Naomi almost admired his skill. He was already laying the groundwork for his disappearance, creating a narrative that would make his absence seem temporary rather than permanent. "That sounds promising," she said. "I hope it works out." "Me too. It would change everything for us." The irony wasn't lost on her. He was right, his trip to Singapore would change everything. Just not in the way he was pretending. After dinner, while Ethan worked in his office, Naomi called Alex with an update on her meeting with Damon Brooks, Financial Phoenix. He said thoughtfully, "I've heard of them. They do good work helping survivors navigate the legal system." "Did Damon mention any specific companies or law firms?" "She said there's a whole industry around this kind of thing. Asset protection services that are really just fraud." "That makes sense. Your husband's methodology is too polished for amateur hour." "Someone taught him how to do this. Can you investigate that angle?" "Already on it. I've been looking into the shell companies he used to hide assets. They were all set up by the same law firm, Veritas Holdings. High-end financial planning for sophisticated clients." Naomi felt a chill of recognition. "Veritas. That name sounds familiar." "It should. They've been mentioned in several divorce cases involving hidden assets, always representing the husbands, always using the same methods." "I think we found your husband's enablers. What's our next step?" "We gather intelligence on Veritas and their clients. If they're running a systematic operation to help wealthy men defraud their wives, there will be patterns, connections, other victims. And then we don't just take down your husband. We take down the whole operation." The Veritas Holdings office occupied an entire floor of a gleaming downtown tower, with the kind of understated luxury that screamed serious money. Alex had arranged for them to observe from a coffee shop across the street, using high-powered binoculars and a telephoto camera to document who came and went from the building. "There," Alex said, adjusting the focus on his camera. "Third time this week." Naomi followed his gaze to see a middle-aged man in an expensive suit entering the building with a younger woman who clearly wasn't his wife. The pattern had become familiar over their 3 days of surveillance: wealthy men arriving for appointments, often accompanied by women young enough to be their daughters. "Asset protection consultations," Alex said grimly, taking photos. "That's what they call them. How to legally steal from your spouse and disappear with your mistress. It's really that organized. More than you can imagine." Veritas has offices in 12 cities, partnerships with offshore banks, and a network of lawyers who specialize in exploiting loopholes in family law. Alex had been building a file on Veritas for weeks, using his contacts in law enforcement and the financial industry. What he'd found was disturbing: a sophisticated operation that marketed itself as providing comprehensive financial planning for life transitions while actually helping clients commit systematic fraud. "The genius of it," he explained, "is that most of what they do is technically legal. Shell companies, offshore accounts, complex trust structures, all legitimate tools when used properly. But when used to hide marital assets, they become instruments of financial abuse." Naomi studied the building through the binoculars, watching well-dressed people enter and exit with the confidence of those accustomed to getting their way. Somewhere in those offices, Ethan had learned how to steal her future and her family's money while making it look like legitimate financial planning. How many wives have been destroyed by this company? She wondered aloud. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And that's just what we know about. Alex's phone buzzed with a text message. He checked it and smiled grimly. Detective Diaz wants to meet. She's been investigating Veritas for months, but she needs witnesses willing to testify. Witnesses? Victims? Women like you who can prove that their husbands used Veritas to commit fraud. They met Detective Clara Diaz at a downtown restaurant, far from both the Veritas office and any place Naomi might encounter Ethan. Diaz was younger than Naomi had expected, probably in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she took her work personally. Mrs. Reed, she said, shaking Naomi's hand firmly. Alex tells me you've been documenting your husband's financial deception. I'd like to hear about it directly. Naomi told her story from the beginning, the notification on Ethan's iPad, the discovery of the secret accounts, the evidence of his planned escape to Singapore. Diaz listened without interruption, taking careful notes and asking pointed questions about dates, amounts, and methods. The shell companies are the key, Diaz explained when Naomi finished. Veritas sets them up in states with favorable privacy laws, then uses them to move money offshore. By the time the victim discovers what's happening, the assets are beyond reach of U.S. courts. But my husband made mistakes, right? That's what Valerie said. He made several mistakes. First, he used marital funds to establish the shell companies, which creates a paper trail. Second, he commingled separate property with marital property when he moved your family's trust money. And third, he's been too systematic. The pattern of transfers matches other Veritas clients. Diaz pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. We've been building a case against Veritas for 18 months. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit theft. But we need victims willing to come forward. What would that mean for me? Testifying before a grand jury, possibly testifying at trial, but also coordinating with other victims to file a class action lawsuit. Veritas has helped dozens of men steal from their wives. If we can prove it's a systematic operation, we can shut them down and recover assets for all the victims. Naomi felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. The idea of taking on a powerful law firm was intimidating, but the possibility of helping other women avoid her fate was compelling. How many other victims are there? That we know of, 17. That we suspect? Probably twice that many. Most women never realize they're victims of systematic fraud rather than simple marital problems. Alex leaned forward. What about Ethan specifically? What kind of charges is he looking at? If we can prove he knowingly participated in a scheme to defraud his wife and her family, 5 to 10 years federal prison, plus full restitution. But that depends on Mrs. Reed's willingness to cooperate. The weight of the decision pressed down on Naomi's shoulders. Pursuing criminal charges would make their divorce a public spectacle, would drag her family's finances into the spotlight, would turn her into a witness in a federal case. But it would also ensure that Ethan faced consequences for what he'd done, and might prevent other women from suffering the same betrayal. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course. But don't think too long. If your husband is planning to leave the country, we need to move quickly. That night, Naomi called Damon Brooks for advice. As a survivor who'd been through the criminal justice process, Damon understood both the benefits and the costs of pursuing charges. It's not easy, Damon admitted. Testifying about your private life, having your financial history examined, dealing with defense attorneys who try to make you look complicit or naive. But for me, it was worth it. Why? Because these men need to face consequences. And because there's something powerful about taking control of your own narrative. Instead of being a victim of his choices, you become someone who chose to fight back. What about the other victims? Do they really cooperate? Or does everyone just take care of themselves? That's the beautiful thing about the Financial Phoenix Network. We support each other through the legal process. When I testified, 3 other survivors came to court with me. When another woman had her trial, I returned the favor. The idea of a community of survivors supporting each other through the fight for justice appealed to Naomi more than she'd expected. For too long, she'd felt isolated and ashamed, as if her husband's betrayal reflected some failure on her part. But connecting with other women who'd faced similar challenges was changing her perspective. There's a meeting tomorrow night, Damon continued. Would you like to come? Meet some of the other women, hear their stories? Yes, Naomi said without hesitation. I think I need that. the financial Phoenix meeting was held in a community center in Oakland, a deliberately neutral location that felt safe and welcoming. About 15 women attended, ranging in age from late 20s to early 60s, all united by their experiences of financial betrayal and their determination to help other survivors. As Naomi listened to their stories, she was struck by the similarities. Husbands who'd insisted on controlling the finances, gradual isolation from financial decision-making, sophisticated methods of hiding assets that suggested professional guidance, and in many cases, the same law firms and financial advisors facilitating the deception. The pattern is so consistent, said Maria Santos, a software engineer whose husband had hidden $3 million in cryptocurrency accounts. It's like they all went to the same school for financial fraud. They did, said Jennifer Wu, a former corporate lawyer who now helped abuse survivors navigate the legal system. Companies like Veritas market their services specifically to men who want to leave their marriages without financial consequences. They've turned spousal fraud into a business model. Jennifer had prepared a presentation about the legal strategies used by these companies, complete with flowcharts showing how assets moved through shell companies and offshore accounts. The sophistication was staggering layers of legal protection, designed to make asset recovery nearly impossible. But they're not infallible, Jennifer continued. They rely on the victim's ignorance and trust. When women like you start documenting and fighting back, their whole system breaks down. After the formal presentation, the women broke into smaller groups to share resources and support. Naomi found herself talking with 3 other women whose cases involved Veritas Holdings, comparing notes about their husbands' methods and timeline. The Singapore relocation is classic, said Rachel Chen, whose ex-husband had tried the same strategy. They promised the other woman an exotic new life while using the victim's money to fund it. It's particularly cruel because it turns the victims' own assets into the foundation for their replacement's happiness. How did you stop it? Criminal charges. Once the federal prosecutor got involved, my husband's assets were frozen. He couldn't flee, couldn't access the offshore accounts, couldn't do anything but negotiate a settlement. Did he go to prison? 18 months. Not long enough, but at least he faced consequences. And I recovered everything, plus damages. As the meeting concluded, Jennifer Wu pulled Naomi aside. Detective Diaz called me about your case. If you decide to pursue charges, I'd be happy to help you navigate the process. We have a whole network of attorneys who work with abuse survivors. Pro bono, some reduced fee, some contingency arrangements. The point is, you won't face this alone. Driving home through the fog-shrouded streets of San Francisco, Naomi felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not just hope for her own recovery, but hope for systemic change. If Veritas Holdings was really running a criminal enterprise, if there were really dozens of other victims, then her case could be part of something larger than personal justice. She thought about Ethan, probably working late in his office, managing his secret accounts and planning his escape. He believed he was smarter than she was, more sophisticated, better at manipulating the system. But he'd underestimated her capacity for strategic thinking, and he'd certainly underestimated the power of women working together. Tomorrow, she would call Detective Diaz and agree to cooperate with the federal investigation. She would testify before the grand jury, work with the other victims, and help build a case that would not only recover her stolen assets but shut down the operation that had enabled the theft. Ethan wanted a war? He was about to get one, but not the kind he was expecting. The wire was smaller than Naomi had expected, barely larger than a button, easily concealed beneath her sweater. Detective Diaz had explained that it would record everything within a 15-foot radius, more than enough to capture Ethan's end of their dinner conversation. Remember, Diaz said, adjusting the device one final time, we need him to talk about the offshore accounts, the timeline for leaving, anything that shows criminal intent. Don't push too hard, let him volunteer information. What if he gets suspicious? Then you abort. Your safety is more important than the recording. They were meeting at Boulevard, an upscale restaurant in Soma that Ethan had suggested for their special dinner. His words, not hers. Naomi suspected he was planning to announce his business trip to Singapore, laying the groundwork for his disappearance while maintaining the fiction of their marriage. She arrived first, choosing a corner table that would give the wire optimal reception while keeping their conversation private. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the menu, but it was nervous energy rather than fear. After weeks of playing the naive wife, she was finally taking action. Ethan arrived precisely on time, looking confident and relaxed in an expensive suit she'd never seen before. He kissed her cheek and settled into his chair with the satisfied air of a man whose plans were proceeding perfectly. "You look beautiful," he said, and for a moment, Naomi almost believed he meant it. "Thank you. You seem to be in a good mood." "I have reason to be. The Singapore deal is moving forward faster than expected." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Singapore? I thought you said it wasn't definite." "Things change quickly in this business. The investors want to move aggressively, and that means relocating to oversee the Asian expansion personally." "For how long?" Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Indefinitely. This is a career-defining opportunity, Naomi. The kind of chance that comes along once in a lifetime." "What about us? What about our life here?" "That's what I wanted to discuss. There are opportunities for you in Singapore too. International schools are always looking for qualified teachers, and the expat community is very supportive." The lie was so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that Naomi almost admired his skill. He was offering her a chance to participate in her own destruction, to willingly relocate to a country where she'd have no legal protections while he systematically looted their assets. "It sounds exciting," she said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "When would we need to move?" "Soon, probably within the next month." "I know it's fast, but these opportunities don't wait." "What about our house? Our life here?" "We'd keep the house initially, rent it out for income. As for our life," he reached across the table and took her hand, "our life would be whatever we make it. New country, new opportunities, new adventures." The wine arrived, and Ethan made a show of tasting it and approving the selection. As he poured, Naomi noticed the expensive watch he was wearing, not the loaner he'd claimed, but something that probably cost more than her annual salary. "That's a beautiful watch," she said casually. "A gift from the investors. They're very generous with their partners." Another lie, but delivered with such confidence that it was almost believable. Naomi wondered how many lies he'd told her over the years, how much of their relationship had been performance rather than partnership. "Tell me about the business structure," she said, leaning forward with apparent interest. "How does the international expansion work financially?" Ethan's expression shifted slightly, a flash of wariness before the smooth facade returned. "It's complicated. Multiple investment vehicles, offshore accounts for tax efficiency, shell companies to manage different aspects of the business." "Shell companies?" "Standard practice for international business. Helps with liability protection and tax optimization." "Are these companies in your name?" "Our names?" "My name primarily, since I'm the one with the business expertise. But don't worry about the details, Naomi. I've got excellent advisors handling the legal and financial structures." The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Ethan gradually revealing more details about his plans. The offshore accounts were for investment diversification. The shell companies were for asset protection. The rush timeline was due to competitive pressures in the Asian market. Every word was being recorded, every lie documented for the federal prosecutors who would eventually build their case against him. "There's something else," Ethan said as they finished dessert. "Something personal I need to share with you." Naomi's heart raced. Was he about to confess his affair with Maya? Admit to stealing her family's money? "I've been working with some new business partners. Younger people with fresh perspectives and international experience. Maya Zhang, in particular, has been instrumental in developing our Asian strategy." "Maya Zhang?" "My executive assistant. Brilliant woman, Stanford MBA, extensive connections in Singapore. She'll be relocating with us to help manage the transition." The casual way he mentioned Maya's relocation, as if bringing his mistress to their new life was a business necessity rather than personal betrayal, made Naomi's stomach turn. But she maintained her composed expression, nodding as if she understood the logic. "That makes sense. It's important to have experienced people managing such a complex transition." "Exactly. Maya's already identified housing options, international schools, even social networks for expat families. She's been invaluable." Housing options, social networks. Maya had been planning Naomi's new life while stealing her current one, organizing the very community that Naomi would join as an unknowing victim of her own replacement. The dinner concluded with Ethan paying the check with a credit card Naomi had never seen before, probably connected to one of the secret accounts. As they walked to their cars, he seemed relaxed and satisfied, as if he'd successfully managed a delicate negotiation. "Thank you for being so understanding about the timeline," he said, kissing her goodnight. "I know it's a lot to process, but I think this could be wonderful for us." "I'm excited," Naomi lied. "It sounds like an adventure." Driving home, she felt the weight of the wire against her chest like a small, mechanical heart beating out the rhythm of justice. Every word Ethan had spoken was evidence, every lie another nail in the coffin of his defense. At home, she uploaded the recording to a secure server that Detective Diaz had provided, then sat in her kitchen reviewing the evening's revelations. Ethan's plan was even more elaborate than she'd suspected, not just financial theft, but psychological manipulation designed to make her complicit in her own victimization. He wanted her to move to Singapore willingly, to participate in liquidating their life in San Francisco, to help him transfer assets offshore under the guise of legitimate business planning. If his scheme had succeeded, she would have awakened in a foreign country with no legal protections, no access to their assets, and no way to prove that she'd been defrauded. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," she typed back. "He gave us everything we need." "Excellent. Meet tomorrow to review the recording?" "Yes." "And Alex?" "It's time to move to the next phase." The next phase involved coordinating with Detective Diaz to freeze Ethan's accounts, working with Valerie to file for emergency asset protection, and preparing for the moment when Ethan would realize that his carefully constructed plan had collapsed. But first, Naomi had one more performance to give. Tomorrow morning, she would wake up next to her husband and pretend to be excited about their new life in Singapore, all while knowing that the only person relocating would be Ethan to a federal prison. The thought brought her more satisfaction than she'd expected. The coordinated operation began at 6:47 a.m. Pacific Time, precisely when the international banking networks opened and Veritas Holdings' latest money transfer was scheduled to execute. In downtown San Francisco, federal agents served warrants on the Veritas offices. In the Cayman Islands, local authorities froze accounts under international cooperation agreements. And in 3 other cities, similar raids targeted affiliate companies in the asset concealment network. Naomi watched the news coverage from Valerie's office, where they'd gathered to monitor the operation's progress. Detective Diaz provided updates via secure phone, while Alex tracked the financial aspects through his law enforcement contacts. $12 million frozen across 17 accounts, Alex reported, including the Singapore account your husband was planning to use for his relocation. What about Ethan? Does he know what's happening? Not yet. The beauty of coordinated financial operations is that they happen faster than people can react. By the time your husband realizes his accounts are frozen, it'll be too late to move any remaining assets. Valerie pulled up the legal filings on her computer. The emergency asset protection order was granted an hour ago. Your husband can't access any marital funds without court approval. The shell companies have been dissolved, and all property purchased with hidden assets is subject to seizure. Naomi felt a surge of vindication mixed with anxiety. After weeks of playing the naive wife while building her case, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. But she also knew that cornering Ethan would make him dangerous in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. What happens when he tries to access the accounts? He'll get automated messages saying the funds are temporarily unavailable due to technical issues, Diaz explained. Standard language that won't immediately alert him to the investigation. But smart people figure it out quickly. How long do we have? Maybe hours, maybe less. At 9:23 a.m., Naomi's phone rang. Ethan's number. Don't answer, Valerie advised. Let him leave a voicemail. The phone rang again immediately, then again. By the 4th call, Naomi could imagine his growing panic as he realized something was wrong. The voicemail, when it came, was carefully controlled. "Hey, it's me. Having some technical issues with the bank accounts. Nothing serious, probably just system maintenance, but call me when you get this." "He knows," Alex said grimly. "That's not panic talking, that's damage control." Naomi's phone buzzed with a text. "Need to talk immediately. Something's wrong with our accounts." She showed the message to Valerie, who nodded. "Time to go public with what we know. Are you ready for this?" Naomi took a deep breath. For weeks, she'd been preparing for this moment, the end of her performance as the trusting wife and the beginning of her role as Ethan's adversary. "I'm ready," she typed back. "At school. Can't talk until this afternoon." This can't wait. Meet me for lunch. 12:30 at Chez Laurent. Chez Laurent was an expensive French restaurant in Union Square, the kind of place Ethan chose when he wanted to impress clients or control conversations through elegant surroundings. But this time, Naomi would be the one controlling the conversation. I'll wear another wire, she told Diaz. If he confesses to anything, we'll have it on record. Be careful. Cornered people do unpredictable things. At 12:25, Naomi walked into Chez Laurent to find Ethan already seated at a corner table, his usually perfect composure showing cracks around the edges. His tie was slightly askew, his hair less perfectly styled than usual, and his hands moved restlessly between his phone and his water glass. "What's going on?" she asked, settling into her chair with an expression of concerned confusion. "The bank accounts are frozen. All of them. They're claiming it's some kind of federal investigation, but that's impossible. I haven't done anything wrong." The lie came automatically, but his delivery lacked his usual confidence. Naomi could see the fear beneath his composed exterior, not fear of consequences, but fear of losing control. Federal investigation? Into what? I don't know. The bank won't give me details, just says my accounts are temporarily restricted pending resolution of some regulatory matter. What about our joint account? Our mortgage payments? That's the strange thing, our regular accounts are fine. It's only the business accounts that are affected. Another lie. Naomi knew from Valerie that all marital assets were now under court protection. But Ethan was still trying to maintain the fiction that his secret accounts were legitimate business assets rather than stolen marital property. Maybe it's related to the Singapore deal? You said the investors were aggressive about moving quickly. Ethan's expression sharpened. What do you know about the Singapore deal? Only what you told me at dinner. The relocation, the new opportunities, Maya Jiang helping with the transition. Naomi kept her voice carefully neutral, but she could see Ethan processing her words. Looking for hidden meanings. Right, yes. It could be related to that. International transactions sometimes trigger automated reviews. He was regaining his composure, constructing explanations as he spoke. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding that will be cleared up soon. What about our trip? You said we needed to move within a month. That might be delayed. Ethan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with barely concealed anxiety. I need to make some calls, talk to my attorneys, figure out what's happening. Attorneys? Plural? Business attorneys, financial advisors. When you're dealing with complex international transactions, you need specialized expertise. The waiter approached to take their orders, but Ethan waved him away. Actually, I'm sorry, but I need to handle this situation immediately. Can we do this another time? Of course. Naomi gathered her purse, playing the supportive wife to the end. Call me when you know more. But as she stood to leave, Ethan caught her wrist. His grip was firm, almost painful, and his eyes held a hardness she'd never seen before. Naomi, you haven't talked to anyone about our finances, have you? Lawyers, investigators, anyone like that? For a split second, she saw the real Ethan, not the charming tech entrepreneur or the devoted husband, but the calculating predator who'd been systematically stealing from her for years. The mask had slipped, revealing someone capable of genuine menace. Who would I talk to? She asked, pulling her wrist free. You handle all our financial matters. Ethan studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But Naomi had been practicing this role for weeks and her performance was flawless. Good, because if someone were feeding information to the authorities, it could complicate everything, make the situation much worse for both of us. The threat was barely veiled, but Naomi met his gaze steadily. I understand. As she walked away from the restaurant, Naomi felt the weight of his stare on her back. The careful game they'd been playing was over. Ethan knew something was wrong, even if he didn't yet understand the scope of what had been discovered. From this point forward, he would be dangerous. She called Valerie from her car. He's suspicious but not panicked yet, still trying to maintain control of the narrative. That's what we expected. How did he seem? Angry. And there was something threatening in the way he looked at me. I think he's capable of more than just financial manipulation. We'll arrange protection if necessary. But for now, go about your normal routine. Don't give him any reason to suspect that you're involved in the investigation. That afternoon, Naomi taught her regular classes while federal agents executed search warrants on Veritas Holdings offices across the country. The news broke during her AP literature class, with students checking their phones and whispering about the massive financial fraud investigation involving prominent Bay Area attorneys. Mrs. Reed, Ashley Martinez asked, "Isn't your husband in tech? Do you think this affects the startup community?" "I'm sure if there are problems, they'll be resolved through proper legal channels," Naomi replied, marveling at how prophetic her words were. By the end of the school day, the media was calling it the largest coordinated takedown of financial fraud operations in California history. 17 law firms, 43 shell companies, and over $200 million in hidden assets. The scope was staggering, but what caught Naomi's attention was the human cost: hundreds of women whose marriages had been systematically looted by husbands working with professional fraud enablers. Detective Diaz called as Naomi was driving home. "We need to talk. Your husband's been making moves." They met at a police station in the Mission, where Diaz had set up a command center for coordinating the various investigations. The room was filled with whiteboards covered in financial flowcharts, photographs of suspects, and timelines showing the movement of stolen assets. "Ethan tried to access emergency funds this afternoon," Diaz explained. "Accounts we didn't know about, probably set up as escape hatches. When those were frozen too, he made several international calls to banks in non-extradition countries. Is he trying to run? He's testing his options." But here's the interesting part: one of his calls was to Maya Zhang. "We've been monitoring her communications, and she's booked a flight to Singapore for tomorrow night." Naomi felt a stab of betrayal, even though she'd known about Maya for weeks. The idea that his mistress was still planning to escape while Ethan dealt with the investigation felt like a new level of abandonment. What does that mean for the case? "It means we need to move faster than planned. If Maya reaches Singapore, she'll be beyond our jurisdiction. And if she has access to accounts we haven't found, she could help Ethan relocate assets before we can seize them. So what's the plan?" "Tomorrow morning, we arrest them both. Maya at the airport, Ethan at your house. We'll execute search warrants simultaneously to prevent them from destroying evidence." The reality of what was about to happen hit Naomi like a physical blow. Tomorrow, federal agents would come to her home to arrest her husband. Their marriage, their life together, their carefully constructed facade of normalcy, all of it would end with handcuffs and media coverage. "Will I need to be there?" "We'd prefer that you're not. This kind of thing can be traumatic for family members, and there's always a risk of violence when people realize their options have run out." Violence. The word hung in the air between them, a reminder that desperate people do desperate things. "Where should I go?" "Anywhere public with witnesses. We'll call when it's safe to return home." That evening, Naomi sat in her living room with Oliver, trying to process the surreal nature of her situation. In 18 hours, her husband would be in federal custody, charged with fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The house around her, their house, filled with 15 years of shared memories, would become a crime scene, searched by agents looking for evidence of his betrayals. Ethan came home late, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. He paced through the house making phone calls, his voice rising and falling as he tried to manage whatever crisis was consuming his attention. "Everything okay?" Naomi asked when he finally sat down. "Just business complications. Nothing I can't handle." But his smile was strained, and his hands shook slightly as he poured himself a drink, his third since arriving home. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No, this is something I need to handle myself." He studied her face again, that same searching look from the restaurant. "You're sure you haven't talked to anyone about our finances?" "I'm sure." "Why do you keep asking?" "Because someone has been feeding information to the authorities. Someone with detailed knowledge of accounts and transactions that should be confidential." Naomi felt a chill of real fear. If Ethan suspected her involvement, if he realized she'd been building a case against him for weeks, there was no telling how he might react. "Maybe it's someone from your business? Maya or one of the investors?" "Maya would never betray me, and the investors have too much to lose." His eyes narrowed. "It has to be someone else. Someone with access to information they shouldn't have." The paranoia in his voice was unmistakable. Ethan was no longer the controlled, manipulative man she'd married. He was becoming something more dangerous, a cornered predator looking for someone to blame for his downfall. "I'm going to bed," Naomi said, standing carefully. "This stress isn't good for either of us." "Yes, good idea." But as she headed upstairs, she could hear him making another phone call, his voice low and urgent. In their bedroom, Naomi packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, documents, money. Tomorrow she would become something she'd never imagined. The wife of a federal criminal, a victim turned witness, a woman whose private life would become public evidence in a major fraud case, but she would also become something else, free. For the first time in years, she would wake up in a world where her husband couldn't lie to her, couldn't steal from her, couldn't manipulate her into compliance with his schemes. The thought sustained her as she lay awake listening to Ethan's restless movements downstairs. Waiting for tomorrow's reckoning to finally arrive, Naomi woke at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of Ethan's voice echoing from the kitchen below, sharp and urgent in a way that made her stomach clench. She crept to the top of the stairs and listened as he spoke rapidly into his phone, his words fragmented, but clearly desperate. "Can't access any of the primary accounts. Yes, I know what we discussed, but the situation has changed. No, she doesn't know anything. I'm certain of that." A pause, then his voice rose dangerously. "Don't you dare hang up on me. We're in this together. And if I go down, you go down with me." Naomi retreated to the bedroom and quickly dressed, her hands trembling as she gathered the overnight bag she'd packed the night before. Whatever was happening downstairs, Ethan was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated. She needed to leave before he directed his paranoia toward her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Diaz. Situation accelerated. Maya Jiang arrested. At airport an hour ago. Moving to arrest Ethan now. Get out of the house immediately. Naomi's heart hammered as she read the message. The federal agents were already en route, which meant she had minutes, maybe less, before her home became a crime scene. She grabbed her bag and Oliver's leash, praying she could get out before Ethan realized what was happening. But as she crept toward the stairs, she heard his footsteps on the hardwood below, pacing with the restless energy of a trapped animal. There was no way to reach the front door without passing through the kitchen where he was making his desperate phone calls. She tried the bedroom window, but it faced the neighbor's house, too visible, too risky. The only other option was waiting, hoping Ethan would retreat to his office or step outside, giving her a chance to escape. Another phone call began, this one even more frantic than the last. "Maya, thank God. Where are you? What do you mean you can't leave? What happened at the airport?" A long pause, and when Ethan spoke again, his voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than his earlier shouting. "They arrested you? On what charges?" "This is impossible. No. Don't say another word over the phone. I'm coming to get you." Naomi heard the slam of a phone being thrown against the wall, followed by a string of curses that would have made her students blush. Then came the sound she'd been dreading, footsteps on the stairs. Moving fast, she dove into the walk-in closet and pulled the door closed just as Ethan burst into the bedroom. Through the slats, she could see him throwing clothes into a suitcase. With manic efficiency, his carefully maintained composure had completely shattered, replaced by the raw panic of a man whose carefully constructed life was collapsing around him. "Passport," he muttered to himself, tearing through his dresser drawers. "Cash, passport, and get the hell out before they..." The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway made him freeze. Then came the voices, calm, professional, unmistakably. "Federal. FBI. We have a warrant for the arrest of Ethan Reed." Ethan's face went white. He stood motionless for a moment, staring at the bedroom window as if he could will the agents away through sheer force of denial. Then he moved with sudden, terrifying purpose. "Naomi," he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "Naomi, where are you?" She pressed herself against the back wall of the closet, barely breathing. Through the slats, she could see him searching the room, his movements becoming more frantic as he realized she wasn't there. "Federal agents. Open the door immediately." The pounding on the front door was like thunder, but Ethan ignored it. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his face twisted with rage. "She's not here," he said when someone answered. "My wife is gone," which means she knew this was coming. Which means she's been working with them all along. Naomi's blood turned to ice. The paranoia she'd seen building over the past few days had crystallized into a cold, calculating fury. Even trapped and facing arrest, Ethan was thinking strategically, planning his next moves. "Find her," he continued into the phone. "I don't care what it takes. If Naomi thinks she can destroy me and walk away clean, she's about to learn otherwise." The front door splintered open downstairs, followed by the thunder of boots on hardwood and sharp commands to show hands and get on the ground. But Ethan had anticipated this moment. As the agent swept through the house, he was already moving toward the bathroom window, a narrow opening that led to the neighbor's yard and possible escape. Ethan Reed, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. But the bathroom was empty. The window screen had been removed, and muddy footprints on the sill showed where Ethan had squeezed through and dropped into the garden below. Naomi waited until she heard Agent Martinez identifying himself before emerging from the closet. The house was full of federal agents, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the chaos Ethan had left behind. Mrs. Reed? Detective Diaz appeared in the bedroom doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. Are you injured? We got your text that you were still in the house. I'm fine. But Ethan, he escaped through the bathroom window, and he knows I've been working with you. Diaz spoke rapidly into her radio, coordinating the search for Ethan while leading Naomi downstairs. The kitchen showed signs of his panic: overturned chairs, papers scattered across the floor, a cell phone with a cracked screen lying near the wall where he'd thrown it. How long has he been gone? Maybe 5 minutes. He was making phone calls. Then he heard you arrive and ran upstairs. When he realized I wasn't there, he got suspicious. What did he say exactly? That I must have known this was coming, which means I've been working with law enforcement. And he told someone on the phone to find me. Naomi's voice shook as she repeated Ethan's threat. He said if I think I can destroy him and walk away clean, I'm about to learn otherwise. Diaz's expression darkened. We'll put you in protective custody immediately. And Mrs. Reed? He's not walking away from this. We have enough evidence to put him away for decades, whether we catch him today or next week. The next few hours passed in a blur of interviews, evidence collection, and security arrangements. Federal agents photographed every room in the house, cataloging the expensive artwork and furnishings that had been purchased with stolen money. They found Ethan's home office had been hastily cleared, computer hard drives removed, filing cabinets emptied, even the paper shredder overflowing with destroyed documents. He's been planning this escape for months, Agent Martinez explained to Naomi as they reviewed the crime scene. The question is whether he has resources we haven't identified yet. What about Maya? Is she cooperating? She's been formally charged, but her attorney isn't letting her talk yet. We're hoping she'll realize that cooperation is her best option. By afternoon, law enforcement had tracked Ethan to a motel near the airport, but he'd abandoned his car and disappeared into the transit system. Security cameras showed him boarding a bus to downtown San Francisco, but he'd changed clothes and was moving with the purposeful anonymity of someone who'd planned for this contingency. He's good at this, Diaz admitted to Naomi as they sat in a secure conference room at the federal building. Better than most white-collar criminals. But he's also emotional and angry, which makes him unpredictable. What does that mean for me? It means we take the threats seriously. You'll have protection until he's apprehended, and we'll be monitoring all forms of communication in case he tries to contact you. How long could he stay hidden? With his resources? Weeks, maybe months. But Mrs. Reed, hiding is all he can do. Now, his assets are frozen, his associates are under investigation, and his passport has been flagged. Even if he evades capture temporarily, his life as he knew it is over. That evening, Naomi sat in a safe house in Marin County, protected by 2 federal marshals and feeling more alone than she had since this nightmare began. The house was comfortable but sterile, the kind of place designed for temporary stays, rather than actual living. Through the windows, she could see rolling hills and expensive homes, but it felt like looking at a world she no longer belonged to. Her phone, carefully monitored by federal agents, rang with calls from concerned friends and colleagues who'd seen the news coverage. Roosevelt High School had released a statement supporting their faculty member through personal difficulties, and Janelle had left 17 increasingly frantic voicemails. I can arrange for your friend to visit, Agent Kim offered. She's been cleared through background checks. Not yet, Naomi said. I need to process this myself first. Instead, she called Damon Brooks, who understood better than anyone what it felt like to watch your entire life implode in a single day. The protective custody is the hardest part, Damon said when Naomi explained her situation. You feel like you're being punished for his crimes, but it's temporary, and it means they're taking the threats seriously. How long did your protection last? 6 weeks. But my ex was caught trying to board a private jet to Monaco with a briefcase full of gold coins. Your husband sounds smarter than that. Not smart enough, apparently. No, not smart enough. These guys always think they're clever than law enforcement, but they're usually just more privileged. Privilege makes you sloppy because you're not used to real consequences. As night fell, Naomi stood at the window watching the lights of San Francisco twinkle in the distance. Somewhere out there, Ethan was hiding, planning, perhaps trying to access resources that could help him escape the country. But he was also alone for the first time in his adult life, cut off from the networks of wealth and influence that had always protected him. For 15 years, she'd believed they were partners building a life together. Now she understood that she'd been a useful prop in someone else's performance, a supporting character in a story where she was never meant to survive the final act. But she had survived, and now she was going to help make sure he faced consequences for what he'd done, not just to her, but to all the other women whose lives he and Veritas Holdings had systematically destroyed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. Naomi, you think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started." Agent Kim was beside her instantly, photographing the message and initiating trace protocols. But Naomi wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. "Let him come," she told the agent. "I'm ready for him." The federal courthouse in downtown San Francisco buzzed with activity as news crews set up outside and spectators lined up for the limited public seating. Naomi's testimony before the grand jury investigating Veritas Holdings had been sealed, but her appearance as a witness in the preliminary hearing was public record, and the media had turned it into a symbol of financial abuse and white-collar crime. "Remember," Valerie coached as they waited in a secure conference room, "stick to the facts. Don't let the defense attorney bait you into emotional responses. You're not on trial here, you're helping the prosecution build their case." Naomi nodded, reviewing her notes one final time. 3 weeks had passed since Ethan's arrest. He'd been captured trying to use a fake passport at a private airfield in Mendocino County, and the scope of the Veritas investigation had expanded far beyond her individual case. Federal prosecutors were now alleging a systematic conspiracy involving dozens of attorneys, financial advisors, and wealthy clients across multiple states. "Mrs. Reed?" Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh approached their table. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was packed with reporters, other victims of the Veritas scheme, and supporters from the Financial Phoenix Network. Naomi saw Damon Brooks in the gallery, offering an encouraging smile, along with several other women whose stories had become part of the larger case. Judge Harrison called the session to order, and Naomi was sworn in. As she took the witness stand, she caught sight of Ethan at the defense table. 3 weeks in federal custody had changed him dramatically. Gone was the polished tech entrepreneur. In his place sat a man who looked older, thinner, and infinitely smaller than the person she'd once loved. He didn't meet her eyes. "Mrs. Reed," Asa Walsh began, "please tell the court about your marriage to the defendant and your role in managing the family finances." For the next hour, Naomi walked the court through 15 years of financial deception. She described Ethan's gradual assumption of control over their money, his dismissal of her concerns about their financial security, and his systematic use of their joint assets to fund secret accounts and investments. "When did you first become aware of the defendant's hidden assets?" "November 15th, when I discovered a banking notification on his iPad for an international wire transfer of 84700. "And what was your reaction to this discovery?" "Shock, initially, then confusion as I tried to understand how such a large sum could exist without my knowledge." The testimony continued with Naomi describing her investigation, the evidence she'd gathered, and her decision to cooperate with law enforcement. Throughout it all, she maintained the composed, factual tone Valerie had coached her to use, even when discussing the most painful revelations. "Mrs. Reed, did you discover evidence of the defendant's extramarital relationship?" "Yes, my private investigator found that the defendant had purchased a condominium in Pacific Heights where he was living with Maya Zhang, his business associate." "And how did this discovery affect you?" "It made me realize that the financial deception was part of a larger betrayal. My husband wasn't just hiding money, he was planning to leave our marriage entirely, taking assets that belonged to both of us." When Asa Walsh concluded her direct examination, Ethan's defense attorney, Martin Blackwood, rose for cross-examination. Blackwood was everything Naomi had expected: expensive suit, silver hair, and the kind of condescending manner that immediately put her on guard. Mrs. Reed, isn't it true that you were aware of your husband's business activities and chose not to involve yourself in the details? I trusted my husband to manage our finances honestly. That trust was misplaced, but you admit that you never asked detailed questions about his business dealings? I asked questions. He deflected them or told me they were too complicated for me to understand. So you were content to let him handle the sophisticated financial planning while you focused on your teaching career? Naomi felt her anger rising but kept her voice level. I was content to trust my husband. The issue isn't my level of involvement, it's his systematic deception, Mrs. Reed. Did you benefit from your husband's business success? The nice home, the comfortable lifestyle, the financial security? I benefited from what I believed was our shared success, yes. I didn't know it was built on theft, but you never questioned where the money came from? I questioned why we seemed to struggle financially, despite my husband's claims of business success. Now I know why he was stealing our income and my family's money to fund a secret life. Blackwood continued his attack for another 30 minutes, trying to paint Naomi as a naive woman who'd willfully ignored obvious signs of her husband's financial sophistication. But every question gave her an opportunity to detail another aspect of Ethan's deception, and her calm, factual responses clearly frustrated the defense strategy. Mrs. Reed, Blackwood said finally, isn't it true that you're testifying here today because you're angry about your husband's affair rather than any actual financial wrongdoing? Naomi looked directly at Ethan for the first time since taking the stand. He was staring at his hands, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. Mr. Blackwood, I'm testifying because my husband stole nearly $3 million from our marriage and my family's trust fund. The affair was painful, but it's the systematic financial fraud that brought us to this courtroom. When the cross-examination concluded, Naomi felt drained but vindicated. She'd told her story clearly and completely, and the courtroom had heard every detail of Ethan's betrayal. As she stepped down from the witness stand, several of the other victims in the gallery nodded their support, but the day wasn't over. Asa Walsh called Maya Jang to the stand. Maya looked younger than her 28 years, dressed conservatively and appearing genuinely remorseful. Her testimony revealed the extent to which she'd been manipulated by Ethan, believing his claims that his marriage was effectively over and that the financial arrangements were legitimate business planning. Did Mr. Reed ever tell you that he was using marital assets to fund your relationship? Walsh asked. No. He said the money came from his business success and that he was protecting it from potential divorce proceedings. Did you know about the shell companies and offshore accounts? I knew he had complex business arrangements, but I trusted him when he said they were legal. I was young and naive, and I believed everything he told me. When did you first realize that you might be participating in illegal activity? When the FBI arrested me at the airport. That's when I learned that the money for our apartment, our travel, our entire relationship had been stolen from his wife and her family. Maya's testimony painted a picture of another victim, someone who'd been deceived by Ethan's charm and sophistication just as Naomi had been, though in a different context. It was clear that Ethan had lied to both women, manipulating each of them for his own purposes. During recess, Naomi found herself face to face with Maya in the courthouse hallway. Mrs. Reed, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know, Naomi said, surprised by her own capacity for forgiveness. He lied to both of us. I loved him. I thought we were building a life together. So did I. The difference is, I was actually married to him. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two women whose lives had been destroyed by the same man's selfishness and greed. Are you cooperating with the prosecution? Naomi asked. Yes. My attorney says it's the only way to avoid serious prison time. And honestly, after learning what he did to you and your family, I want to help put him away. When court reconvened, the judge heard arguments on the prosecution's motion to deny bail pending trial. Given the evidence of Ethan's flight risk and the sophistication of his financial crimes, the motion was granted. He would remain in federal custody until his trial, which was scheduled for the following spring. As Naomi left the courthouse, she was approached by a reporter from the Chronicle. Mrs. Reed, how does it feel to see your husband in custody? It feels like justice is beginning, she said. But this case isn't just about my husband. It's about a systematic pattern of financial abuse that destroyed dozens of families. I hope our testimony helps prevent other women from suffering the same betrayal. That evening, Naomi returned to her temporary apartment in Oakland. She'd sold the Richmond house and was living simply while the legal proceedings continued. The space was small but clean, with a view of the bay that reminded her daily that she was beginning a new life. Her phone rang with a call from her parents. "We saw the news coverage," her mother said. "We're so proud of how you handled yourself in court." "Thanks, Mom. I know this has been hard on you too." "The money doesn't matter," her father interjected. "What matters is that you're safe and that justice is being done." But the money did matter, Naomi knew. Not just for her family's financial security, but for what it represented. Every dollar Ethan had stolen was a piece of trust, a fragment of security, a bit of hope for the future. Recovery wasn't just about getting the money back, it was about reclaiming the life he'd tried to steal. As she prepared for bed, Naomi received a text from Damon Brooks. "You were amazing today. The whole Financial Phoenix network is talking about your testimony. You're going to help so many women." For the first time since this ordeal began, Naomi felt something approaching peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, continued legal proceedings, media attention, the long process of rebuilding her life. But tonight, she could rest knowing that she'd spoken her truth publicly and that her words might help prevent other women from suffering the same betrayal. Ethan had tried to erase her from his life, to reduce her to a minor character in his story of reinvention and escape. But in the end, it was her voice that would be remembered, her testimony that would help bring justice, her courage that would inspire other victims to come forward. She was no longer Ethan Reed's wife. She was Naomi Reed, survivor and advocate, ready to face whatever came next. 6 months after Ethan's sentencing to 12 years in federal prison, Naomi stood before the glass windows of her new office in the Mission District, watching the morning fog roll over San Francisco Bay. The space was modest but bright, with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors that reflected the organization's commitment to transparency and authenticity. The sign on the door read, "Financial Phoenix Foundation, supporting survivors of economic abuse." What had begun as an informal support network had evolved into a nonprofit organization providing legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to women escaping financially abusive relationships. Naomi served as executive director, working alongside attorneys, investigators, and counselors who understood that financial abuse was often the invisible foundation of domestic violence. "The Chronicle reporter is here for the interview," announced Jessica Kim, the foundation's communications coordinator. At 26, Jessica had been one of their first clients, a tech worker whose venture capitalist boyfriend had manipulated her into signing over her startup equity before disappearing with her intellectual property. "Send her in," Naomi said, straightening her blazer. Today marked the 1-year anniversary of Ethan's arrest, and media interest in the Veritas Holdings case remained high. 17 defendants had been convicted, resulting in over $200 million in asset recovery for victims and systemic changes to financial privacy laws. Sarah Chen from the Chronicle entered with the crisp efficiency of a veteran investigative reporter. She'd been covering the Veritas story from the beginning, and her series on financial abuse had won several journalism awards. "Mrs. Reed, or should I say, Director Reed, thank you for taking the time. Just Naomi is fine. And thank you for your continued coverage of these issues." Media attention has been crucial in helping victims understand their rights. They settled into chairs near the window, where Naomi could see the downtown skyline. That had once represented Ethan's world of tech success and financial manipulation. Now it simply looked like a city full of possibilities. "Let's start with the foundation," Sarah said, setting up her recording device. "How many clients have you served in the past year?" "Directly? About 200 women. But our resource materials have been downloaded thousands of times, and we've trained attorneys and counselors across the country to recognize and address financial abuse." "What's the most common pattern you see?" "Gradual isolation from financial decision-making, often disguised as protection or partnership. The abuser takes over bill paying, investment management, tax preparation, all the while claiming they're handling the complicated financial matters so their partner doesn't have to worry." "Like what happened to you?" "Exactly like what happened to me. I thought I was being supported, when actually I was being systematically excluded from my own financial life." Sarah flipped through her notes. The Veritas Holdings case resulted in criminal convictions, but it also exposed how many professionals were enabling this kind of abuse. Has that changed? Some. The new federal regulations require more disclosure in complex financial planning. and several states have strengthened their fiduciary duty laws. But the fundamental problem persists. There's still an industry of lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors who help wealthy people hide assets from their spouses. What about your personal recovery? How are you doing financially and emotionally? Naomi paused, considering how much to share. The past year had been a journey of reconstruction, both practical and psychological. Financially, I recovered most of what was stolen plus damages. The house sold for more than expected, and I was able to restore my family's trust fund. But more importantly, I have control over my financial life for the first time in years, and emotionally, that's been harder. 15 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight, even when you discover it was built on lies. I've been in therapy, working through the trauma of betrayal and learning to trust my own judgment again. Do you have any contact with your ex-husband? None. His appeals have been exhausted, and he'll serve at least 10 years before being eligible for parole. By then, I hope to have helped enough other women that his individual impact feels less significant. Sarah leaned forward with the instinct of a reporter sensing a bigger story. You mentioned appeals. Is there anything new in his case? Nothing. That affects the conviction. But there have been developments in the broader investigation, such as… Naomi smiled, enjoying the moment of revelation. The Justice Department has expanded the investigation internationally. Veritas Holdings had partnerships with firms in London, Singapore, and Sydney that were providing similar services to wealthy clients. We're talking about a global network facilitating financial abuse. How global? Hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly billions, moved through these networks over the past decade. The full scope is still being investigated, but it's clear that what we uncovered in San Francisco was just one piece of a much larger operation. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you involved in the international investigation? As a consultant and advocate, yes. I work with prosecutors and victim services organizations to help them understand the psychological and practical impacts of sophisticated financial abuse. That sounds like it could be dangerous. Working against international criminal networks? It could be. But I have excellent security support. And honestly, the work is too important to let fear dictate my choices. They talked for another hour about the Foundation's programs, the legislative changes that had resulted from the Veritas investigation, and the growing recognition that financial abuse was a serious crime rather than simply a divorce matter. As Sarah prepared to leave, she asked one final question. What would you say to women who might be reading this and recognizing patterns in their own relationships? First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong with your family's finances, investigate. Second, document everything: transactions, conversations, suspicious behavior. And third, know that you're not alone. There are resources available, and there are people who understand what you're going through. Any final thoughts on your ex-husband? Naomi looked out at the bay, where ferries carried people between different parts of their lives with casual efficiency. Ethan thought he was smarter than everyone else, that he could manipulate the system and disappear with everything we'd built together. But he underestimated the power of truth and the determination of the women he tried to destroy. In the end, his greatest weakness was his inability to see other people as fully human. After Sarah left, Naomi spent the afternoon reviewing case files for their newest clients. Each story was heartbreakingly familiar: successful women who'd gradually been excluded from financial decisions, who'd watched their standard of living decline while not understanding why, who'd discovered hidden assets only after their marriages ended. But increasingly, their stories had different endings. Women were coming forward earlier, armed with knowledge about their rights and resources for fighting back. The Financial Phoenix Network had grown to include chapters in 12 cities, and their legal advocacy had resulted in millions of dollars in recovered assets. At 5 o'clock, Naomi locked her office and walked to her car, a modest Honda Civic that she'd chosen deliberately, preferring simplicity over status. The Richmond house had sold for enough to establish the Foundation's endowment and purchase a small condo in the Mission, walking distance from work and close to the community she was helping to build. As she drove home through the familiar streets of San Francisco, she reflected on how much had changed in the past 18 months. The city looked the same, but her relationship to it was completely different. She no longer saw it through the lens of Ethan's ambitions or their shared history. It was simply home, her home, chosen and shaped by her own decisions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janelle. Dinner tomorrow? New restaurant in Hayes Valley. Perfect, Naomi replied. Can't wait to catch up. Janelle had been her anchor throughout the legal proceedings, offering practical support and emotional grounding when the media attention and legal complexities threatened to overwhelm her. Their friendship had deepened through the crisis, built on a foundation of honesty that felt revolutionary after years of living with Ethan's deceptions. At home, Naomi opened a bottle of wine, a modest Pinot Noir from Sonoma rather than the expensive Bordeaux that Ethan had preferred, and settled onto her couch with Oliver. The dog was older now, moving more slowly but still devoted to his evening routine of settling beside her as she read or worked. Her laptop chimed with an email from Detective Diaz. Thought you'd want to see this. Maya Jiang graduated from law school last week and will be joining a firm that specializes in representing abuse survivors. Thought you'd appreciate the irony. Naomi smiled at the news. Maya had served 6 months in federal prison, then rebuilt her life with the same determination that characterized so many survivors. They'd spoken a few times during the legal proceedings, finding common ground in their shared experience of Ethan's manipulations. As evening settled over the city, Naomi reviewed the Foundation's quarterly report. They'd helped recover $3.2 million in assets for their clients, provided legal representation in 47 cases, and trained over 200 professionals to recognize and address financial abuse. But the numbers that mattered most were harder to quantify: the women who'd learned to trust their instincts, who'd refused to be isolated from their own financial lives, who'd found the courage to demand transparency and accountability. Her phone rang with a call from her parents. How's our daughter, the foundation director? Her father asked with obvious pride. Busy, but happy. We're expanding the legal clinic and adding to new counselors. And personally, are you taking care of yourself? It was a question they asked regularly, their concern for her well-being evident in every conversation. I'm doing well, Dad. Really? Well, this work gives me purpose, and I'm building a life that feels authentic for the first time in years. Any romantic prospects? Her mother interjected with the gentle persistence of someone who wanted her daughter to find happiness. Maybe. There's someone interesting, but I'm taking things very slowly. Learning to trust again takes time. Good. You deserve someone who sees your strength and celebrates it rather than trying to diminish it. After ending the call, Naomi walked onto her small balcony and looked out over the Mission District. The neighborhood was alive with evening energy, restaurants filling with diners, couples walking hand in hand, families gathering for dinner. It was a different kind of wealth than what she'd known with Ethan, built on community and connection, rather than accumulation and control. Her laptop chimed again, this time with a message from a woman in Portland who'd read about the foundation online. I think my husband has been hiding money from me. I don't know where to start, but I'm scared and I need help. Naomi typed back immediately. You've already started by reaching out. We're here to help you every step of the way. Tomorrow she would connect this woman with their Portland partner organization, help her understand her rights, and guide her through the process of documenting and recovering what belonged to her. It was work that mattered, work that created ripples of justice that extended far beyond any individual case. As she prepared for bed, Naomi caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was recognizably the same person who'd discovered that banking notification 18 months ago, but fundamentally changed. The fear was gone, replaced by confidence earned through surviving and fighting back. The naive trust had been replaced by discerning wisdom. The dependence had been replaced by self-determination. She was no longer someone else's wife, victim, or supporting character. She was Naomi Reed, advocate and survivor, building a life and a community dedicated to ensuring that other women would never have to face financial abuse alone. In her bedside drawer, next to the current novel she was reading in her reading glasses, lay a small leather notebook. Inside were handwritten notes from the women she'd helped over the past year, thank you messages, updates on their recoveries, and sometimes just words of encouragement from one survivor to another. The last entry was from Maria Santos, the software engineer whose husband had hidden cryptocurrency assets. Because of you, I got my life back. More importantly, I got myself back. Thank you for showing me that surviving isn't enough, we can thrive. Naomi closed the notebook and turned off the light, listening to the gentle sounds of the city settling into night. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, and new opportunities. to help women reclaim their financial lives and their autonomy. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, free, purposeful, and surrounded by a community of survivors who had transformed their pain into power and their betrayal into justice. The ledger of her life had been rewritten. And this time, she was the one holding the pen. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.